Now, Islam is the fastest growing religion in Ireland, and Muslim immigrants are the fastest growing immigrant group. Very soon, Ireland will have its first generation of second-generation Muslims. Today we're asking, if all other migrants seem to be integrating quickly, why are Muslim immigrants not integrating like other groups? Now, I'm joined by a practicing Muslim and FT journalist, Mehreen Khan. Mehreen, first of all, welcome to Dublin.
Thank you.
And secondly, what I want to ask you is, your parents were Muslims in England who kind of hid their Islamic faith. Your generation are much more open. Why is that?
I think you see a pattern with every immigrant group, the first or second generations that come in. It's very economically driven. It's economic migration. So people come, they want to get their head down, they want to work very hard, and they want their kids to succeed. And that is the general pattern of immigration that's happened in Britain, whether it's Jewish communities, African communities, Caribbean communities, Asians. And then later on, third or fourth generation migrants are far more self-confident about who they are because they don't necessarily see themselves being pulled between two cultures. So my parents and my grandparents have some kind of psychological connection towards their ancestral home in a way that I won't really have because I will just visit it, you know, sporadically. But when it comes to religion, I think Islam offers a universalism which is not cultural. And it is a faith, and it's a faith which can be taken outside of its historical context and adapted to wherever a Muslim wants to practice it. It's the same as any kind of Abrahamic faith like Christianity or Judaism. And I think what we've seen in Britain is that we have economically mobile migrants and who then have children who are born into kind of lower and the middle classes. And they have a version of their own Islam, which is very different from the Islam of their parents or their grandparents. So, for example, if you were born in a Muslim majority country, there's really no need to wear the headscarf because everyone is Muslim around you. So wearing the headscarf is almost like you don't need to assert that identity. But for some young Muslims, for them, they do want to be seen to be Muslim.
When you're born in the UK, for example, born in Ireland, because you see, it's interesting talking to you because Irish Muslims, kids born now, first generation, okay, are going to end up very much like yourself. They're the second generation, third generation Muslims in England, with these dilemmas that they have to deal with and ways of expressing themselves. And yet, I suppose my question is the cost of standing out at the moment, whether you're in Holland or France or America, is very high.
It's changed in the last, I think, 5 or 6 years. But then you have to think about if you're a young person and you're brought up in a faith which for you is beautiful and it's you know, it's spiritual and it's about families and values. But then you open a newspaper and you look at television and suddenly this thing, Islam, is scary and it's a threat to the West and it's, you know, it's something that's not, it doesn't fit. And you're a young person. Young people, I think, are rebellious by nature. And, you know, for me, when I was very young, you know, Islam was seen to be, it was pilloried and it was something that was scaring people. And it actually attracted the kind of rebel in me when I was like, well, if people are going to be scared of me, then maybe
I'm going to do all this
yeah, you know,
stuff.
It's not that dissimilar to being a punk or loving certain types of music and getting told by the Daily Mail in the 70s that you were a threat to British values, right? So there will be some kind of dissident element.
It's Islamic youth culture you're talking about, in a way. So let's just talk about the studies that we've seen in the UK, which have been unambiguous in their conclusions, which is that Islamic people do not blend into the UK society as quickly as other immigrants.
I would question the premise of this term integration. So a lot of these reports look at things by asking people what is their primary identity. And a lot of Muslims would say their primary identity is we are Muslims. And that in these surveys kind of stands out as anomalous from other religious groups who would say they're Asian first or they're African first or they're British first. But actually by saying that your primary identity is Muslim for me does not mean that you are not a British Muslim, because by saying, somebody asked me, I would say I'm a British Muslim. And being a British Muslim is very different from being an Arab Muslim or what my parents would be, Pakistani Muslims. My form of British Islam is uniquely Muslim and it's uniquely British. And therefore, that tension does not exist. Another thing that the integration surveys ask is about intermarriage. So Muslims do not marry other faiths as much as some religious groups. And in that sense, I would ask people anecdotally, most people marry people who are from very similar backgrounds for themselves, and they share the same values, mainly because they want to bring up children in very similar ways. So it's not, you know.
But in a multiracial society, what's very interesting about the surveys is most Muslims respond like, I wouldn't marry, for example. I would choose not to marry a non-Muslim. Now, in a multiracial society, does that mean that you're separating yourself at very, very profound moments of your lives, and that scares the host population? Do you see? I'm trying to make sense of what's going on.
So, for example, the Mayor of London is a Muslim. He's a man who identifies as being a Muslim. He's married to a Muslim woman, and he brings up Muslim children. And none of that has stopped him from being a very fully participating, active member of society. And most of the people that I know are very similar. I think we start from the premise that being Muslim somehow is a little bit foreign and it's just not part of us. I would tell people, particularly in Ireland, that being a Muslim, you basically share 90% of the socially conservative values of your host country, which is Ireland, which has a predominantly Christian and Catholic culture. And Muslims have a very strong sense of social conservatism. Muslims, traditionally, they should, in the UK, vote Tory, because that is the roster of social and moral values that all Muslims are brought up with.
But when you see then, so when you see fundamentalism, how does that make you feel?
So something has changed in that we talk about Islam on a social level, but over the last 10 years in Europe, Islam has become a political identity. And that's also why it attracts some young people who are self-confident, because they see it. They are attracted to the political identity. Being a Muslim in Europe anymore, you can't hide away from the politics. You are politicized by your very nature, because your governments and populists and people say that you are to blame for some things, ask you to apologize for some things, and say that your community needs to kind of fix up. I think we have to separate the kind of mainstream social. Most people just want to live their lives, very ordinary lives as Muslims. And then there's the political identity. It will attract people who are disenfranchised. It will attract people who want to take the rebellion too far. That is something that I don't think we should ask the Muslim community to sort your house out, or that is something.
You don't think you should,
I think it's something that the wider society.
But the Muslim community should say, hold on, guys, listen. If you're in a mosque and if you're listening to this stuff and this is and you're young and this is inflaming you and this is radicalizing you, we as the mainstream Muslims should actually intervene here.
I think it's the responsibility of the government, of the whole of society, because the truth is that the mosque is not where people go to be radicalized. The mosque is somewhere where people go to pray. It's very easy to say this is happening in physical spaces and people are brainwashing kids. Actually, kids do what kids do. If they're curious, they go on the internet and they will find stuff and they will teach themselves and make themselves believe whatever they want. It's a very, very difficult thing to police. I don't believe that the state should really have a role in cracking down on mosques. It might seem to be a vote winner because, mosques are bad places with angry men with big long beards who shout a lot. That's not how kids are radicalized. It just isn't. They find their own communities. It's on social media. It's on the internet. This radicalization is very difficult to stop.